Good morning. Welcome to my talk, Neurodiversity in Games, We Can Make a Better World. The games industry thrives on innovation and diverse collaboration. This presentation is about both of those things. So please stick around, and I promise to make it worth your time. So why am I here? When my child was 5 years old, she was diagnosed with autism and dyspraxia. At that point, I didn't understand what neurodivergent really meant, but I soon learned how unprepared this world is to support people like her. As a game designer, I saw an opportunity to change that through the worlds we build and the stories we tell. So, I should probably introduce myself. My name is Brian. I'm a game designer, nonprofit educator, and neurodiversity advocate. I live here in Malmö, Sweden with my family. I've been in the games industry for about 20 years now. These are some of the games I've worked on. I'm also a passionate volunteer who hopes to make a difference. I volunteered teaching game design and game development to disadvantaged kids in Los Angeles and San Francisco. And since moving to Sweden, I've volunteered with local schools and nonprofits, as well as while at Massive Entertainment, I worked extensively with the Ubisoft Neurodiversity Employee Resource Group. Now I'm the chairman and lead instructor for Divergent Neurons Academy. We provide free education in video game development with a focus on serving the neurodivergent community. So first, let's make sure we're on the same page about the terms neurodiversity and neurodivergent. Many human brains tend to function and get wired in a similar way. We call this neurotypicality. However, a significant number are wired differently. We call this neurodivergence. We refer to the spectrum of differences in human brains as neurodiversity. You may have already heard about some neurodivergences, such as ADHD, autism, dyslexia. Neurodivergence can come with challenges in many areas, such as concentration, social interactions, memory, motor control, and communicating. The neurodiversity movements do not consider these labels as disabilities, but rather as neurological variations that cause you to experience the world in different ways. What the medical labels of neurodivergence don't say is that many individuals concerned have talents and skills, with some of those far above average. For example, increased focus, creativity, innovative thinking, authenticity, and reasoning. So, now that we have a common definition, let's talk about why it's important to talk about neurodivergence. Neurodivergence is prevalent. About 1 out of 5 people is neurodivergent. However, this may just be the tip of the iceberg, because for some people, diagnosis can be very hard to access. So this affects a lot of people. Video games in particular have a very strong link to neurodivergence. For example, in March 22, the trade body for the UK games industry published the results of a census among game developers. It revealed that the prevalence of neurodivergence in the games industry is roughly double that of the working age population. So there's a strong link between neurodivergence and game development. Sadly, there's a lot of challenges that neurodivergent people face, particularly in the workforce. So while 20% of the adult population is neurodivergent, 40% of neurodivergent individuals are unemployed or underemployed. 85% of new graduates with autism are unemployed or underemployed. And this means that as much as 13% of the workforce is differently abled and may be underutilized talent. As a result, about 70% of workers with a neurological condition do not want to disclose that condition to their employer for fear of discrimination. This is particularly impactful now with the games industry in the throes of unprecedented layoffs globally. This post from a neurodivergent worker speaks to this fear. Quote, "I'm literally afraid of asking about accommodations or anything at all because any inconvenience to my employer could make me get canned." The connection between neurodivergence and gamers is also very strong as well. Studies have found that autistic children and adolescents spend more than 2 hours a day playing video games. 18% of people in the video game industry are neurodivergent, and therefore this can lead to employment for neurodivergent kids. And 41% of autistic young people spend their time gaming, compared to 18% of non-autistics. Games are also important to neurodivergent individuals, especially in children. It's because they benefit from learning key life skills, social skills, finding a community, and feeling a sense of achievement. And why do they feel this way? Why does it have this effect? Because they provide safe spaces that make people feel cared for. Living as a neurodivergent person in a neurotypical world can have a profound impact. When your behavior or traits are stigmatized, you cope by masking to fit into a normative environment at work, at school, or even in your own family. Masking is the act of suppressing or concealing neurodivergent traits in order to appear neurotypical. Masking has a cost. In order to mask, you need to spend a significant amount of energy, and you have a limited amount of energy to go through the day. There's actually terms for this: spoon theory and fork theory. Spoon theory comes from describing chronic pain. Imagine you have just 12 spoons of energy to go through the day, and each work task has a cost in spoons. When you've spent all your spoons, you have no more energy. Fork theory is similar, but in reverse. You can only take being poked by so many forks before you need an opportunity to remove them and decompress. So as I started to educate myself about neurodivergence, I wanted to get involved. I discovered a community of neurodivergent people and allies at Ubisoft, the Neurodiversity Employee Resource Group. In early 2021, Pierre S. Cash called for the formation of a group on neurodiversity. He said in an invitation letter, quote, "We strongly believe that we can only progress on neuroinclusion if we're together, neurodivergent and neurotypical alike." This is a community that has over 600 people globally. So I found and joined the Neurodiversity ERG, but it wasn't until they arranged their first game jam that I got involved. I created a game based on my partner's experience with hypersensitivity in the workplace. I call this game Too Many Forks. In the game, you play as an IT person who works at a company that employs pirates, zombies, and space aliens. You have hypersensitivity, and their sounds, smells, and bright lights affect your forks. As you go about your daily tasks, you accumulate forks due to these environmental triggers. When you get too many forks, you have to go to a cold, dark, empty room to recover, usually down in the basement. Of course, I credited my family both for contributing and consulting. My game was really well received, so much so that Pierre asked me if I would consider continuing to develop it into a tool for HR and managers to educate about the challenges that high sensitivity presents, that it can affect performance, and that reasonable accommodation is a win-win scenario. Employees get better working conditions, and employers get more productive employees who produce higher quality work. A topic I worked on with Pierre and the Neurodiversity ERG was looking at the representation of neurodivergence in video games. I'll share some of that research with you now. First, let's look at the AAA space due to its high visibility. And this is what you're going to see, a progression from neurodivergent side characters to player characters with neurodivergent backgrounds to player characters with neurodivergent game mechanics. This first example comes from the Borderlands series, Patricia Tanis. She's, quote, an insane introvert with Asperger's. She lacks empathy, experiences echolalia, and has difficulty with social cues. Next is Dr. Bridget Tenenbaum from the BioShock series. She is the geneticist who discovered Adam, the mother to the little sisters, a scientific genius, and diagnosed with autism. So, what did neurodivergent gamers say about this? Quote, "I never really cared that people with a neurological disorder were a rarity in fiction. What honestly bothers me is all the negative stereotypes in which anytime you do see a character like that, they're usually a murdering psychopath." Next up is Mass Effect 2's Overlord DLC. Spoiler warning, I'm going to reveal the ending. David Archer is revealed as autistic by his brother Gavin. He is a mathematical savant, capable of rapid calculation, has an eidetic memory, and sensitive to loud noise. Gavin is basically torturing David in order to reach his own ends. There's only two options available to conclude the DLC. You can either take David away with you and put him into a facility that'll give him the care that he needs, or the other is to leave David in Gavin's care, who will most surely continue torturing him. Moving forward through time, we have Josh Socek from the Watch Dogs 2 game. He is a hacker with ironclad memory, socially awkward, and very literal. He also avoids physical contact. More recently, we have Birdie from The Division 2. She is revealed as autistic, is a technical genius who attended Stanford at 12, and she's dedicated to alternative power solutions. So, what do neurodivergent players have to say about this? Quote, "It's rather troubling for me as an autistic person to see that the vast majority of autistic characters are not playable characters. As a gamer, not having games with autistic protagonists provides a subtle message that stories about people like me are not worth telling." Now let's take a progressive step forward and discuss playable characters, starting with Symmetra from Overwatch. She has issues with social interactions, suffers from hypersensitivity. She's anxious and needs routines. Symmetra's neurodivergence actually started as a fan theory that was later confirmed by game director Jeff Kaplan in response to a fan's letter, which was posted on the internet. One of the first operators in Rainbow Six Siege was Jaeger, who is confirmed as autistic. He has a passion for aviation, an intense curiosity, a tendency to info dump, and he always wears his headgear. According to Simon Ducharme, who is a writer on the project, Jaeger wasn't intentionally created as autistic. Instead, the traits of the writer came through, and the fans were the ones to pick up on that and embrace it. We also have Aurora from League of Legends, who the developers describe as having autism, as well as Watson from Apex Legends, who is described as being on the spectrum. There's Moses from Life is Strange Double Exposure, who was written as autistic. In the upcoming Just Dance map for Galantis' song Bang Bang, the player is invited to experience the character's unmasking and the euphoria that comes from living as their true self. Giving the player permission to stop masking as part of a game experience can be very powerful, especially when it comes from a successful artist that they might admire. So that's all I have for AAA in regards to the progression of neurodivergent representation. There is progress, but still much left to be desired. This is where we turn our lens to indie games and serious games to continue seeing progress, because we ask ourselves the question, where are the playable experiences? Let's start with games that are specifically about neurodivergence and the lived experience of neurodivergent people. First up is Tourette Quest, a game developed by a developer who wanted to convey his lived experience with Tourette syndrome and narcolepsy. In the game, the player must manage HP, MP, and stress. Players soon realize that the true enemy here is stress and that the battle is internal. And that's what he's really trying to communicate. There's an invisible resource war going on. To win, you have to manage your stress. If it maxes out, your symptoms will dictate every move you make, and while you're trying to wrestle control back from yourself, the monsters will pound you into submission. Next up is Prism, which was created by a team at Carnegie Mellon University's Entertainment Technology Center. Prism was designed to help neurotypical children empathize with their peers who have autism. In the game, you play as a fox who experiences difficulties adapting to daytime and sunlight. This is a metaphor for autism-related sensory sensitivity. Next up is the game Autism. In the game, the player navigates through a playground as a child with autism and auditory hypersensitivity. Proximity to loud children on the playground causes sensory overload for the player, impacting their cognitive function. This is represented as visual noise and blur, as well as audio distortion. It got quite a bit of attention with articles on Destructoid and Ars Technica. Autism illustrates the pitfalls of claiming to represent autism without the caveat that it's only one experience. Due to the news coverage, it received a lot of plays and a lot of negative feedback from people with autism. As a result, the developer apologized. The lesson here is to take great care when presenting a game that shows only one perspective of a lived experience as broad as autism. Next is the game I Don't Have a Cue. It's a game about two women trying to develop a romantic relationship, one of them having autism. Reception of this one is quite different. Next is Max, an Autistic Journey. It's a turn-based RPG created by a father and son team, the son having autism. In the game, an anxiety meter builds up and must be managed while battling monsters. Players gain XP through these battles while confronting Max's fears and anxieties. The developer did include this caveat, quote, "While there is a wide spectrum of autism, this game focuses on Max, where he falls on that spectrum, and how he experiences and deals with daily life." The game does stand at very positive reviews on Steam and generated a lot of discussion on the topic. Quote, "This game made me think more about neurodiverse representation in gaming, how the medium is a great canvas for conveying neurodiverse experiences, but how far we still have to go to do this effectively and respectfully. My ultimate critique of the game, it tells us about autism instead of showing us or letting us experience living with a piece of autism. What if the mechanics, the game design, let us experience a taste of compartmentalization instead of being told about it? Life Resounding is a game that was designed to raise awareness about neurodiversity by encouraging players to engage with slices of life of a neurodivergent person thrust into a world that was designed for neurotypicals. It was informed by the personal experiences of the development team as well as those close to them and academic and scientific research. Blink in the Vacuum of Space is a VR game that is specifically designed for people with autism. Each level offers stress-free fun without any fear of discouragement. An always available chill-out zone allows players to take a break if they need it. It also includes robust accessibility features that allow players to customize the sounds and the visuals of the game. So now that we've seen a progression of representation of neurodivergence in games, let's take a look at a parallel track, the representation of mental health in games. It's worth noting that the representation of mental health in games has seen progress in a similar way. This is relevant because several aspects of mental health, like depression and anxiety, are experienced by neurodivergent individuals. By looking at examples of the progress made in the depiction of mental health, we can take note of how the depiction of neurodivergence might find similar progress. Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice is a great example of this. Both a critical and commercial success, in the game you play as Senua, a Viking warrior who has psychosis. As a result, you constantly hear voices talking to you throughout the game being leveraged as gameplay elements. The effects of psychosis are relevant for the gameplay for puzzles, combat, and exploration. What made Hellblade different was that the developer, Ninja Theory, partnered with mental health professionals with a determination to treat the subject with care and consideration. They also interviewed people who actually have psychosis. The results are striking. A clinical test proved that watching or playing the game reduced people's stigmas about psychosis and mental health. This demonstrates that positive representation can reduce harmful stereotypes and stigmas. In a talk on mental health in games, Dom Matthews from Ninja Theory gave some valuable insights that how they created such a character. First, make sure you understand the subject matter, both clinically and the lived experience. Then, create a character that could be a real person, well-rounded, dynamic, and with depth. Another frequently cited game in this regard is Celeste. For those unfamiliar with the game, Celeste is the name of a mountain that the character Madeline intends to climb along with their companion Theo. Madeline's mission can be read as a metaphor for a journey of self-acceptance, specifically the challenge of coming to terms with rather than overcoming or healing their depression and anxiety. Madeline's anxiety manifests in the game, and the player, alongside Theo, experiences it with them. The gameplay is intentionally very difficult, at least for me. The developers added an assist mode, which in itself is a metaphor for accepting help. There's one moment in the game that is particularly instructive and supportive of people with mental challenges. Madeline is caught by a panic attack when the gondola mechanism carrying them and Theo up the mountain suddenly stalls, leaving them trapped. Theo tries to remain calm and helps Madeline deal with their panic attack, first as labeling it as such, and then by teaching them one of his grandfather's coping mechanisms. Both Madeline and the player are asked to imagine a feather, which then appears not in the scene between Madeline and Theo, but in a separate frame clearly intended for the player. Your breathing keeps the feather floating, Theo instructs Madeline and the player. It turns into a mini-game where the feather has to stay in a specific frame controlled by the player. It's intentionally quite difficult to do. This is mirroring the challenge of controlling anxiety. This example shows how well the player can become attuned to the way that Madeline experiences anxiety. There are other popular indie titles that have addressed mental health challenges. Stardew Valley has the player helping Shane with his depression. Chicory, A Colorful Tale, deals with imposter syndrome, depression, and anxiety. Disco Elysium has an RPG-like system for choosing the player's inner voices, which represent different aspects of their psyche and their mental health. This is actually based on a method from evidence-based psychotherapy known as internal family systems. IFS conceives of every human being as a protective and wounded inner part system led by a core self. The game Before I Forget is about the experience of living with dementia from the first-person perspective of an Indian woman in her 50s. It was born at the XX Plus Game Jam in 2016. It won the Audience Choice Award, and the two developers decided to continue developing it into a full release. Upon release, it was nominated for a BAFTA. I had the opportunity to interview one of the developers, Shella Ramanan, about her experience making the game. These are some interesting points that she shared with me. They started from the storytelling aspect. They didn't intend to create an empathy generator for dementia. The seed came from a fascination with memory and how memory loss might affect the self. The mechanics include manipulating the space, teleporting, colorizing, and 3D objects which are 2D. This is an actual experience of people living with dementia. They did extensive research, and along the way, they worked with mental health workers who play-tested the game to ensure authenticity. But most importantly, getting it right took time and iteration. So let's summarize what we've seen about the state of representation of neurodivergence in games. Progress is happening, but is far from complete. Stereotypes and tropes about neurodivergence still exist. The breadth and variety of the neurodivergent experience hasn't been explored fully. It's time to move past NPCs and backstories towards playable experiences. And this can't be done authentically without including the neurodivergent community. Representation isn't just about what characters say or their backstories. It's about what players are asked to do, the systems they navigate, and the stressors that they feel. So now that we understand the progression of neurodivergent representation in games, we can ask ourselves, what could it look like for games to represent neurodivergence in game mechanics? As with any creative project, the first step is research. Listen to what neurodivergent people say. Interview people who are neurodivergent. Find discussions in forums where neurodivergent people gather and learn more about the topic. There's a wealth of information readily available, you just have to look for it. For my research, I found a blogger named Graythorn on YouTube. She's a gamer who's also autistic. She made a lot of great suggestions for representing neurodivergence as game mechanics, and I'll share it here with her permission. For the subject of sensory overload experienced by people with autism, she used the game Ruiner as an example. There's a lot of sensory information in the game that the player has to parse in order to see the vital gameplay information. If you're depicting a character who has hypersensitivity or who's experiencing sensory overload, you could leverage conflicting stimuli that you must parse. Separating useful information from false or distracting information when clearly part of the gameplay can be applicable to many types of games. For Greythorn, a big aspect of her lived experience with autism is a knack for pattern recognition. Having a game present or reinforce patterns, or a character who can see patterns where others don't, could demonstrate authentic autistic traits. This could be presented like a vision mode, or it could overwhelm the character and appear on its own. Another aspect that she encourages developers to explore is social conventions, rules, and norms. For a person with autism, these can feel complex and nonsensical, yet everybody obeys them. This could take the form of a player exploring an alien civilization where you need to blend in but struggle to do so. Burnout leading to skill loss is another mechanic that she sees as relevant because it's something she's experienced as well. A good example here, Darkest Dungeon. Going on longer runs, players encounter debilitating stress. When pushed too hard, this can lead to afflictions, which have both positive and negative effects. Recovery itself at the abbey or the tavern can lead to afflictions of its own, and recovery requires rest, which is reminiscent of spoon and fork theory. I sat down with a coworker who has autism, who's also a game designer, and we discussed the topic. Together, we came up with these ideas. A puzzle game where you are the puzzle. Learning and figuring out that you see the world differently. Learning about masking, if and how you're doing it. For her, learning these things helped her to be part of a team, to understand others, and to accept herself. Another gameplay concept, adding an impairment that can be removed through a coping mechanism, or having access to a support network that you can reach out to for help. This could be similar to Earthbound's Homesick status effect. In this classic RPG, the game encourages you to seek the help that you need by calling home. This is a particularly empowering mechanic to implement as many people who are neurodivergent find it difficult to experience their own coping mechanisms without harsh judgment from their neurotypical peers. In the new version of my game, Too Many Forks, intended as a training tool for HR and managers, I wanted to leverage gameplay more than I did in the Game Jam version. Now, the player experiences the workday of 3 different individuals who struggle with environmental and social stressors which impact their ability to do their jobs. My design concept was to give players relatively simple tasks to perform, then create impairments that demonstrate that even these tasks can be difficult or impossible to do due to hypersensitivity. The programmer, Anita, has a sensitivity to light that causes her migraines and visual impairment. I use post-processing effects to create visual distortion to simulate the effect of how migraines might come in waves. This impairs the player's ability to do a seemingly simple find and replace task. The designer Tobias needs to do a delicate player controls tuning task. However, each time the conversation behind him spikes in volume, he's physically affected. For the player, this takes the form of a screen shake and uncontrolled cursor movements, which makes this relatively trivial task practically impossible to perform. Finally, the artist Ash is surprised by an unscheduled call from her director, who info dumps on her. During his info dump, she begins to have an anxiety attack. This is mostly audio-based. Gradual increase in audible heart rate, heavy breathing, and reverberations of the spoken audio make it very hard to discern what's being said at times. After the call, the player has to take notes and finds that they missed out on several vital pieces of information. In all these cases, the point being driven home is that reasonable accommodation for these individuals could have prevented all of these scenarios. Now, this isn't just the right thing to do. As defined by law, when autism, ADHD, or related conditions substantially affect an employee's ability to do their job, they're protected under EU and many national laws. This allows individuals to request reasonable accommodation and be shielded from discrimination. So, to close this talk, let's summarize what we've seen. Neurodivergence is prevalent, more so in gamers and game development. Neurodivergence is challenging. Lack of accommodation and stigmas have real impact. Neurodivergent representation is lacking, but progress is happening. We have the opportunity to be positive change. Games are uniquely positioned, as is our community. So, I encourage you to consider if your game's concept or character is an opportunity to improve the representation of neurodivergence. If so, educate yourself. Reach out to neurodivergent individuals and communities. Normalize, break stereotypes and tropes. Drive acceptance through authentic experiences. Create characters that could be real people. And most importantly, use game mechanics to give players the opportunity to experience it firsthand. We can, quite literally, make a better world for neurodivergent and neurotypical alike, while providing gamers with unique and innovative experiences. I hope that some of you will be part of the positive progression of neurodivergent representation in games. Game mechanics can be empathy engines. Let's use them to build a better world for everyone. As I mentioned earlier, I'm a nonprofit educator who focuses on serving the neurodivergent community. I'm also a consultant at the intersection of game development and neurodiversity. Feel free to reach out to me if there's any way I can help. And thank you for attending my talk.
Thank you very much, Brian. Yeah.
Thank you.
Now we have some time for questions. So if you have a question, please raise your hand. Yeah, I'm going to you.
Hello, thank you for the great talk. I'm just wondering, being on the spectrum myself, the masking is a big issue. It costs a lot of energy, like you told me, but are there any tips you can give me or my colleagues, like how to handle it? Because, for example, when I explain something, they don't really get it, or they're like, what the hell is he saying? And the other way around is also the same sometimes. So how do we handle it?
I think that the most important here is it's not really on you, like you're trying as hard as you can. The thing that's defective here is your workplace. And so finding ways to gather a community where you can actually have real change with your employer. So for example, like, you know, at Ubisoft, we have the Neurodiversity Employee Resource Group, which helps to advocate for people and to help to create better workplaces where we do things like, you know, for a meeting, making sure you know before the meeting what to expect and you've got notes afterwards, or having different ways that people can communicate effectively. So I think that, like, really, you know, it's really about being able to reasonably request the accommodations that can help not just you, but accommodations benefit neurotypicals as well in most cases. So I think that, you know, the best step that you can take is to start to gather people who have similar experience. And as you start to reach out, you'll find allies like myself, and you'll find others. And it's through those groups that you'll be able to, like, push on your employer to, like, to make the change in the workplace. Now, you know, it's a challenging thing to do because a lot of times employers look at accommodation as treating people differently. They want to treat everybody the same. And they think that, like, an accommodation means you get special treatment. But, you know, a wheel trail ramp to get access to your workplace is not special treatment. And they also, another one of the arguments about accommodations is, oh, well, it's going to cost us money, which is mostly ludicrous because most accommodations are just a matter of adjusting expectations, maybe changing the office and being considerate of people. Like the opportunity to work remotely is a prime example of an accommodation like that. And so, you see I have some other resources up here, and that first one, Exceptional Minds, has a PDF that is exhaustive in its discussion, and it's a great starting place for you to take that and share it with other people, give it to your employer so that they can understand, and it's exhaustive in explaining the problem, the solutions, how to approach it, and I really think that's a great starting place. Mm-hmm.
Thank you for your amazing talk. It was very dense, but from my own personal experience and observation in the video game industry, I think that the first step will be that neurodivergent people understand that they're neurodivergent.
Yeah.
Most of them don't know that. Mm-hmm. And if even there are some diseases, neurodiversity is not a disease, mm-hmm. They just go to the doctor prescribing pills and don't understand why the problem is coming from. It's not a problem. The problem is a society that doesn't take in account the diversity of mental functioning. So mm-hmm. I think my question is, how can video game help in the video game industry, in the society in general, help the neurodivergent people to understand how they function?
Mm-hmm. I mean, through talks like this in education, we reveal the subject. And, yes, a lot of people who are neurodivergent as adults, a lot of times they only discover it by their children having a diagnosis and they see where it came from. But there's also, there are movements to give better access to diagnosis. There's actually a company called Brightlobe that is developing a technology that can be built into any video game that will actually look for triggers and be able to give a diagnosis. Imagine you play Assassin's Creed for like a couple hours, and at the end it's like, oh, by the way, this third-party software says that you are a candidate to be diagnosed with ADHD. So technology is trying to help address the problem. I think, advocacy and like spreading awareness is a big part of it. And we're in a much better place now, but the work is still just begun. So absolutely, helping people to understand and see the traits inside them and realize, because when you've gotten so used to masking and so used to something that becomes automatic, it can be very hard to actually see what's right in front of you. So I totally agree that diagnosis is something that we need to give better access to.
Hey, I was wondering about your thoughts about a thing that's been a bit annoying me with representation in media, that whenever traits of neurodivergent people are presented in a positive way, it's always in a matter of purely conventional, genius or a savant. There's never any representation in someone being so for example, someone being a racer and that helping him, because that totally could happen, but there's always just characters that are conventionally geniuses when they're neurodivergent.
Yeah, we had the same problem with film and television, where most people first learned about autism, for example, from the movie Rain Man, and that was an extreme depiction. And then we also hear a lot about, for example, autistics who are nonverbal, and so you get this the newspapers and the media in America being very polarized. And I think that the answer is kind of what Hellblade did with their character, which is to depict something as two sides of the same coin. Yes, it gives you some strengths, but it also gives you some challenges. That's a far more interesting character than the superhero. So I think that we need to understand that when we make well-rounded characters with realistic portrayals, that's way more interesting than pushing things to the extreme to the superhero type aspect, which totally leaves out the fact that there's a lot of challenges. And so, for example, if you were going to depict, sensory overload or pattern recognition, you should balance that out with the challenges that come along with that superpower. If you look at classic comics, you had incredible superheroes like Superman, Spider-Man, etc., that dealt with other issues that made them interesting and well-rounded characters. And so I think that's also where we have to move away from the tokenism of side characters. And when we create player characters, we want to give them well-rounded, balanced, deep kind of backgrounds and experiences. So I think it's just something that as gamers, we also have to push for as well, and say, like, this depiction is shallow, it's not as interesting as it could be, and it's imbalanced. And so we want to see the progression moving in the right direction. So absolutely agree that that's something that we have to look out for, the stereotypes and the tropes.
Thanks.
Absolutely.
Hello. As an educator, we organize group projects with a lot of very diverse people. They just get thrown together and they have to organize a full production pipeline by themselves. So naturally, that's very hard in general. But then there's some people who indeed find it way harder to find their place or discover that way later that communication is hard or stuff like that. So my question to you would be, how could we communicate with them clearly so we can help them help their group help them, right? So what rituals or communications can we put in place so they can understand themselves better, which is still an ongoing process, and have the other students understand them and help each other?
So to be clear, you're talking about mixed teams of neurodivergent and neurotypical.
Yeah, any amount of people.
Oh, absolutely. And this is the thing that we see in the workplace as well, that very often we're talking about teams that include both sides. I think the first step is making sure that we don't think everybody can be treated identically, like not everybody works effectively in different ways. The other thing we have to do is respect people in regard to whether they disclose or not. And so if they are, willing to say, I am autistic and can use accommodation, then that's something we should support. But if they don't want to, we don't want to put them in the position of like outing them or pressuring them. But like I said, that there are approaches that benefit neurotypical and neurodivergent alike. And so just knowing some of these things, like another resource I point to is neurodiversity.design, which is a resource for how to create educational materials that take into consideration the different way people learn and the different way that presenting information can benefit both. So I think that there are some generalities, like again from the Exceptional Minds website as well, where you can take some of these things that are effective practices for neurodivergent people and make sure that in the group they understand, like, all right, like having clear expectations, respecting people's productivity time, and how the methods in which they communicate. Also, if you can find somebody within the group who, is essentially the driver and the champion or the producer for the group, and, make sure that you help to educate that point of contact and they can spread that information. So I think that those are approaches that you can take, but the most important thing is it needs to be customized to the individuals, because when we talk about, a spectrum as large as neurodivergence, it would be easy to generalize to like some of the extreme traits. For example, my daughter with autism, has very different experience than the stereotypical what you think of from an autistic boy. And so if you were to, say, oh, well, she's going to have trouble with social communication and like making eye contact, it's not at all her experience. And so I think you have to look at the group and customize to it. But you can get the help of somebody within the group, hopefully. Yeah. All right. Thank you very much for attending the talk and the Q&A.